I think we are about to witness the funniest Wayland protocol to happen in a very, very long time. Right now, very little has actually taken place. The fighting has not yet begun. We are on the ground floor. And frankly, I don't expect the protocol to actually go anywhere in terms of implementation. However, this is prime ground for some very, very funny conversations. Right now, as of a couple of days ago, in the upstream Wayland protocol repo, XX hotkey v1 global hotkey protocol. Is the protocol good? Is the protocol practical? Is it even going to solve the problem? It literally doesn't matter because it is not going to be merged. There is already a solution that pretty much every desktop environment has already settled on, and that is the global keyboard shortcut portal. This was opened quite a long time ago, and also merged quite a long time ago in the XDG portal repo. Now, when it comes to the individual desktops, within the past couple of years, pretty much all of them, even the slower moving ones, now have a portal implementation. There is now a solution in place to support global shortcuts on Wayland. If you don't know what a global shortcut is, basically being able to run a shortcut in an application when that window is not in focus. Say you are playing a video game, push to talk on Discord, that would be a global shortcut. Right now on Wayland, doesn't work. Well, there are workarounds to get it to work on things like KDE, but it doesn't work consistently because the KDE solution is basically a hack. However, whilst it has been merged for a long time, it hasn't been used by a lot of the applications for a long time. In recent years, it has been merged into Chromium, which does cover modern versions of Electron. I know Discord is working on it, but when it comes to certain other applications, it is still a work in progress, a waiting game. For example, in OBS, implement global shortcuts portal opened back in December of 2022 and still has not yet been dealt with. There is a number of reasons why OBS hasn't merged it, and we'll get to a bit of that a bit later. Also, with OBS and some other applications, there are workarounds. OBS, you might notice, I'm pressing these buttons and it's changing things on my overlay. This is being done with my Stream Deck, and that's being done with the OBS WebSockets. So it's basically the OBS web server running in the background. I'm sending commands to the web server, and that tells OBS to do things. It's not a perfect solution. I would like the global shortcuts to work like they do on X11, like they do on Windows, like they do on Mac, like they do on every other system that OBS supports, except for Wayland. Now, even though it doesn't matter because it is not going to be merged, let us read the protocol description. This protocol lets a client choose and freely reconfigure its own global hotkeys. It requires a specific key combination, and the compositor accepts it or denies it with a reason. The compositor, that being the desktop, stays the arbiter. It can deny, revoke at any time, apply any policy at once, but within that application manages its own bindings at runtime with no out-of-band user configuration and no persisted compositor state. This is the Wayland equivalent of register hotkey on Windows, register event hotkey on macOS, and xgrab key on X11. Applications that depend on global hotkeys, launchers, push-to-talk, media controls, streaming software currently either can't offer the feature on Wayland or resort to workarounds. Why a Wayland protocol rather than a portal? The trigger key sim is defined in the same numbering as the key map delivered over WL keyboard on that seat, with a specified layout group matching rule. The portal's trigger strings have no key map to resolve against, and the portal can't even return a stable parsable representation of the current binding. The compositor consumes the trigger and key press, so the client has no input serial of its own. The pressed event carries one for XDG activation token v1.set serial, so raising a surface from a hotkey works through the normal activation path. A dbus signal can't carry a Wayland input serial, so portal activation can't produce a valid activation token, and no dependency on a running portal and dbus session, which users of many standalone compositors don't have. This, I think, is one of the ones that's going to be very hard to sell to Wayland people, because Wayland sort of has the expectation now that dbus is going to be running, portals are going to be there. That is sort of the direction things are moving. So if you want to have a system that doesn't have dbus, doing things upstream You can, but you've got to really somehow convince them. And for a lot of things, that's not going to happen. Relation to existing approaches. The Action Registration Model, Global Shortcuts Portal, Hyperland Global Shortcuts v1, the Action Binder RFC. So this is a separate protocol that was from 3 years ago now. Oh my god. A separate protocol for addressing the problem. Makes the user pick the trigger out of band. For cross-platform apps with in-app shortcut settings, this inverts the UX of every other platform. The app can only suggest a trigger with no feedback on what got bound, can't rebind from its own UI, and depends on a compositor setting UI many compositors don't have. This right here is a big part of the reason why OBS hasn't implemented the portal. The portal is a UX nightmare for any application developer because what it forces you to do is not configure the shortcuts in the application configuration method, but instead configure them in whatever method is provided by the desktop. So in KDE, that's going to be in their settings, in GNOME, I don't know, probably in their settings, and then some other environment comes along, does their own thing. Basically, you just entirely ignore the fact that each individual application defines their own UX and just say, oh no, the desktop is just going to take over that for you. Which also is the problem where if you want to do something non-standard, like let's say you want to have multiple keybinds, and let's say the desktop you're on doesn't support letting you set multiple keybinds, that just cannot be done. Let's say you want to disallow double binding where two different actions can be bound to the same key. If that's in the application can control that. But if it's something defined by the portal, that's up to the portal implementation, that's up to the desktop. Whilst I am happy there is a solution in place being the Global Shortcuts portal, I also understand why applications have been kinda wary to implement it because it doesn't take their considerations into play whatsoever. It is entirely based around what the desktops want. Here, with this protocol, every request gets an explicit answer, bound or denied with a reason code and an optional human-readable message. A bound hotkey can be withdrawn via revoked with a reason that tells the client whether re-requesting is acceptable. The client always knows the true state of its bindings. With the portal, the client has no idea. Absolutely no idea. And there's also issues where there's technically an interface on KDE, on GNOME, and various other desktops to configure the bindings. But once that interface disappears, who knows where they're going to appear? Again, with KDE, they're in the settings, but it is so inconsistent how the portal actually functions. Now, this is what makes this protocol extra amusing. If this was just waiting for anything to happen, I probably wouldn't talk about it. But no, that's not the state that things are in. There is a couple of implementations listed. Now, one of those implementations is the actual application made by the developer of the protocol. This one doesn't count. However, this protocol spawned out of the Hyperland project, which already is a great sign for upstream Wayland not merging it. This was opened back on June 7th, and after a little bit of back and forth, not really much in the way of criticism, just about the way the protocol is actually being named and some other very little things, by June 14th, this was merged into Hyperland. So, we already have one desktop where the protocol is merged. Now, it's a desktop where the maintainer is banned from Free Desktop and banned from Wayland, but it is a desktop nonetheless, and it is one of the most popular desktops out there. And you know what? The thing that I said was going to happen has started happening. Rather than going through upstream Wayland, rather than trying to iron out that issue and deal with all the problems that come with doing that, instead, go to the compositors, go to the clients, and deal with them first. Get it merged in the places that are actually going to use it, and then maybe go to upstream Wayland, because this is not the only one. Now, a lot of the others are open, but there is a protocol open over on Niri. Niri, not really much has gone on here. They're still kind of discussing it a little bit, but there's more here. There is more. over in the Ghosty terminal, it has also been merged. So now you have it merged in both an application and a desktop. Also, there is another pull request over in OBS. We'll talk about this one because this one I think is the most interesting. Now, if it was just a bunch of, random open PRs, I probably would have just ignored it. But the fact that there are mergers happening on this protocol, I don't think this is going to be merged in upstream Wayland, but I think there is a non-zero chance that this protocol is going to happen, whether or not upstream Wayland actually wants it to happen. Obviously, it's not in the major desktop environments. Obviously, it's not in most window managers. But a lot of protocols that now are merged into upstream Wayland initially started as something that came out of the Sway project, that came out of WL Roots. That was the way that a lot of things were done, 8+ years ago. That was the norm. Upstream Wayland being the place where extensions were being done, that's a relatively recent thing. Are we going back to the way things were done, where a couple of environments implemented something and then it sort of expands from there? I don't know, but we're certainly stepping in that direction. Whilst there was some positivity, it wasn't all positive. Over in OBS, things went a little bit differently. So the explanation here is basically the same explanation that was in the upstream project. Then we get this response from Mr. Titan652. OBS can only rely on portals, cross-DE, and display protocol agnostic or upstream non-ext Wayland protocols. So for shortcuts, both OBS Studio and portals needs discussion and works to be done. Now, Titan652 is a name you probably haven't heard in quite a while, but if you used OBS on Arch Linux like 6+ years ago, the way that people primarily recommended using it was the Titan652 AUR package. Nowadays, we have the Flatpak, and the Flatpak does basically everything you'd want from this, but this was very important quite a while ago. This, I think, is a totally reasonable response, and did result in this being temporarily closed, following up by saying, unlike portals that are DE agnostic and display protocol agnostic, your protocol will never spread beyond a few window managers. There is no point to support this kind of protocol from an application standpoint. An application should mainly rely on DE agnostic API and, if really needed, on Wayland protocols from Wayland Protocols repo. Out of focus hotkeys falls upon the portal umbrella since this is outside Wayland protocol scope for desktop applications. Both OBS Studio and the global shortcut portal needs changes, edit, and trying to get around it. Portals is not the proper way long-term wise. But even though it was closed, it's sitting open here. The reason for that is another name that showed up. Joel Bethk, otherwise known as Fenrith Vidi. This is someone who you'll see constantly in the OBS project, constantly doing bug triaging. They are one of the faces of the project if you actually pay attention to how development is done. He decided to overrule that closure. I'm opting to reopen this for further comment and discussion. As from where I sit, there hasn't been any meaningful movement on the portals piece for several years at this point, and a less than ideal solution is better than just sitting on our hands waiting for something theoretically better to arrive. And we have another person here, MeHawk90. I'm not categorically against this, but I do have some concerns with the general approach here. Reading between the lines in your comments on the Hyperland and Neri PRs, trying to get this merged sounds like a tactic to eventually leverage the inclusion here for an upstream proposal to Wayland protocols, and that just seems backwards to me. So this is before the upstream PR was actually made. And you know what? That is exactly what was being done here. This guy knew. And I'm sorry to break it to you, even though Hyperland is the flavor of the month, it has been the flavor of the month for about 3 or 4 years now. The market share of it and Neri combined is tiny. So even if this gets merged, I doubt that is going to give you any kind of traction for a Wayland Protocols proposal. You say that, but again, this is the way that things were done in the early days of Wayland, with protocols being merged into Sway, and then eventually, progressing out to other environments. What you should be focusing on is trying to get this into Plasma and or GNOME or even Cosmic, because that is where the majority of users is. It's funny to say Cosmic has more users than Hyperland. Plasma, yes. GNOME, debatably at this point, but Cosmic's definitely not on that list, because that is where the majority of users is, especially ones coming directly from Windows that already have extensive setups and require global hotkey support. But I suspect you know as well as I, that is unlikely to happen unless there is an official protocol. You might have luck with Plasma. Plasma has adopted many of those ext protocols that came from wroots, but I don't see it happening for GNOME. GNOME I agree with, because they can't even go and implement like the core upstream Wayland protocols. To be clear, my concern is not with the way this functionally works, but with why this should be merged and the general approach of standardizing the protocol. Let's be ultra optimistic and say that by some miracle, both Plasma and GNOME merge your protocol as ext or even XX. But then, what happens if your upstream protocol is ultimately rejected and the relevant implementations removed from both? That doesn't actually matter. Upstream doesn't actually matter if the desktops are implementing it. There's this idea that like Wayland upstream actually controls like how development is done. No. This is why they are very wary about ever approving something, because if they approve something, maybe GNOME will remove it. But it's not going to be removed from anything else. Once it is approved, it is approved. There is no going back. There are old versions of the protocol used for virtual keyboards that are still in use, even though they've been superseded for many, many years now, because that's the way it works. When it's out there, it is out there. Now, the dev did have a bit of pushback on this. Yes, that is correct, as in using the implementation as leverage, but I don't think it's that backwards though. As far as I can tell, this is how a lot of the current ext protocols came to be. WLR data control started as a downstream wroots protocol, got adopted by compositors and clients over the years until it became a de facto standard. Even Kwan implemented it years before any standardization, and then got upstreamed as ext data control, nearly unchanged. WLR screen copy, ext image copy capture is a similar story. Protocols that already have implementations and users end up standardized. The ones that have neither tend to stall for years. So upstream Wayland tends to operate as this like overseer of how protocols should be developed. It is a top-down approach to protocol development. It is defined in Wayland, and then over time the implementation is done. What is being done here, what was done early on with wroots, which wroots has stopped doing because it's sort of gotten on board with the top-down approach, is a bottom-up approach, where you define the protocol, and then rather than going to upstream Wayland, you then have it implemented into clients, into desktops, and then over time, it gets this user base, and that user base then eventually goes to upstream, and that is how you get the protocol, officially standardized. Neither approach is wrong. One of them does lead to protocols that take about 15 years to iron out though. What got those WL protocols upstreamed is that clients and compositors were already shipping them. OBS is probably the most cited application for this whole problem, which has an issue that has been opened for years. And for what it's worth, ext inclusion formally requires at least one open source client and open source server implementation, so a client implementation like this one is literally part of the requirements for the proposal, not a way around it. For GNOME, I agree it realistically only happens after upstream. They don't even implement most ext, but Plasma and Cosmic have adopted protocols early, before when the demand was there. Kwan shipping WLR data control being one example, and demand is exactly what client adoption like this demonstrates. In the meantime, users on compositors already ship the protocol get working shortcuts today, instead of waiting 5 more years for basic features. This got a very short response back, basically saying, I'm not against it, I just find it odd, and that's pretty much where it stopped. And then the announcement here of the official upstream proposal. This was also made in all of the other repos where this was being opened as well. But do note, in the Hyperland one here, where did that one go? Right here. There was a bit of a bit of fun about this. If any of you is involved with FTO, I submitted an official proposal. We're all banned. Well, I'm not. Yet. We'll see how that one goes. So far, the fighting has not yet begun, and if this protocol does get merged, it's probably not going to be, for 5+ years, frankly. Now, there is one response I did want to highlight from Sebastian Wick, with actually a reasonable response. I'm probably not going to convince people who believe that having any dependency on dbus is a bad thing, and therefore everything needs to be a Wayland protocol. But for the reasonable people, I think it's important to know a few things regarding this point here. This is not the case. The global shortcuts portal exists and is in active use by apps and implemented by Wayland compositors, except for OBS, who has specifically outlined why they can't support it and why it breaks their UX. But sure, it does exist and applications do use it. Regarding the trigger key sim, this isn't a feature, but an anti-feature. Global shortcuts must work with systems which do not have a keyboard and must support things like touch gestures, which of course, as we all know, is something we're all using for controlling global shortcuts. As we know, that is an expectation from global shortcuts. Sure. That is just demonstrably wrong. Mutter does create an activation token for the global shortcut portal for activated and deactivated. So this is basically the end of things currently. And I don't expect it to be merged. What I do think might happen though is if this is implemented in clients, if this is implemented in compositors, it may eventually force their hand and they kind of just have to accept it. So even though upstream might be doing the upstream thing, we don't know just yet, we'll have to wait and see, you can circumvent upstream. You don't have to do things top down. You can do it bottom up. That is the way that things have been done in the past, and you can support this. Like, if you run one of these compositors that you want to have global shortcut support, you can add the protocol. If you have an application where you want to support global shortcuts, you can add the protocol. You don't have to wait for upstream. You can actually change things. You can. Now, it's going to bother some people that I'm saying this, but it's the way it's been done in the past, and it can be done again. So we will wait and see. And as always, do not go and bother upstream with your nonsense. You don't need to leave your comments about how important this is unless you have a reason to get involved in the development. Just don't. There's no reason. If you want to say stupid things, do it in my comments. That'll be great for the algorithm, but keep it out of the repo. So, if you like the video, go like the video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you think a protocol like this is a good idea? Do you think it has any chance of actually going anywhere? Or do you think it's going to be stopped for many, many years? Let me know. So, if you like the video, go subscribe as well. Go hype if you're on mobile. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Stelly Barrapay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and activate the hotkey.